single most important job I've ever done isn't the 32 years I spent at the Bank of England. It was the job in the fruit shop. We have approaching 10 million people who are economically inactive. 10 to 15 million who do not have the skills they need. Massive skills gap that is getting worse over time because active listening at the local level. That's how we had the instinct, the nose, the sixth sense for what was being said. And out of that can come a real sense of what needs fixing. What's the single most important thing for people's lives to make it better?
Hello, I'm Matt.
And I'm Hayaatun.
And this is What We Don't Know. It's all about better leadership in a crazy world.
What does a dog and a frisbee have to do with economics?
And how can somebody who's worked at the Bank of England for 30 plus years think that the most important job he's had is working in a greengrocer's?
Why do we all need to think about the mountain we want to climb?
How do you learn to communicate by riding a bicycle around the country?
What was it really like working with Mark Carney?
And Rachel Reeves.
We're going to find out because we've got a great guest today, Andy Haldane.
What do we know about Andy Haldane? Remarkable guy. He grew up in the north, went to school and university across many northern towns. He was the first person in his family to do A-levels, let alone go to university. He became an economist at the Bank of England, despite not having taken maths as an A-level, and started out working in a greengrocer's. And now, well, he is leading the University of Sheffield. That's 30,000 students trying to figure out how to make their way in the world. He's the president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which is an organisation that gives business a voice and helps businesses to grow and thrive. I think he's one of the best people to give us an overview of why the world's as crazy as it is and what we can do about it. So Andy Haldane, you know him quite well. How do you know him?
I know him because we've worked together a little bit, for example, on levelling up. So helping to make sure that people right across the UK benefit from progress in technology and economic opportunity. And he's a really smart guy and a great communicator. He's so comfortable on a public stage. I'm quite looking forward to probing a bit more about the person behind the public face.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Quite often people who are real experts struggle to kind of communicate that expertise in a way that most of us can understand, but he's got a real knack for that as well. I think it's one of the things I admire in leaders is making complicated things seem simple and relevant to everyone.
That's so true, and I think that's been really important, not just for his media work, but actually also for his ability to work with politicians. He's done a lot of work with politicians of different flavours, and he worked with some interesting people in his past life at the bank.
Do you think we'll get anything out of him about what it's really like to work with some of these prime ministers and chancellors?
We're going to give it a good go, aren't we?
Yeah. I wonder what it's like being in the rooms when, when the crisis really hit, the global financial crisis really hit. I guess Gordon Brown was in role as Prime Minister in the UK, and so he must have been in some rooms where there was some really fast manoeuvring to be done.
He absolutely has been in those rooms. And I'm also interested to learn about how, as somebody who always seems to have about 10,000 different things going on at any one time, some of them really big ticket, as you say, kind of high octane stuff that matters, how does he make sure that he keeps body and soul together? How does he manage stress? Quite interested to see if he'll share some of that.
Yeah, some people look sort of effortless, don't they, in leadership positions, but they've got their own ways of coping with the stresses and strains.
We've all seen behind the curtain, haven't we, Matt?
What's your favourite way to cope with stress?
That's a whole nother episode. So, Andy, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here and really looking forward to a great conversation. We like to start by just getting a feel of, I guess, current leadership role, and you being the overachiever you are, you've got at least two going on at the moment. So tell us a bit about what it means to be the Chancellor of the University of Sheffield and the President of the British Chambers of Commerce, and why you wanted to do these roles. What is it you're hoping to achieve through them?
Thank you. Wonderful to be here and to chat to you both. I think insofar as there is a common theme or golden thread to what I've done over my, who knows how many years now, a lot, 30 odd, it is the intersection between the public sector, the private sector, civil society, academia. If I look over the course of history, the magic moments, the breakthrough moments, the industrial revolutions, the success of them, the source of them, the crucible of creativity has been the coming together of those four segments of society, them working in partnership. And I've tried over the course of my 30 odd years to have a finger in each of those pies. And that continues to this day, Hayaatun. Academia through Sheffield, and then business through the British Chambers of Commerce, charity through Pro Bono Economics, which I founded almost 20 years ago now, and through the big music venue I chair up in Newcastle. And then public sector, in some ways I've been immersed in that my whole life, and now I'm doing more dabbling on that than immersion. But the common thing there, the important thing there, is working across boundaries, both disciplinary and sectorally, because that way good things follow, I think.
And if you look at specifically, say, Sheffield and actually British Chambers of Commerce, what are you seeing in terms of sentiment or the big challenges that you in your role are going to need to engage with?
Yeah, there is a common theme there as well, I think, across sectors. And it's a sense of having been psychologically scarred by the repeated events, the repeated nasties, actually, of the last approaching 20 years. I think the starting point for that was the global financial crisis. But then in quick succession, we had Brexit. We had COVID.
Yeah.
We had the
and
cost
you were
of
at the
living.
Bank of England all the way through all of those big
right
moments,
up
right?
until the penultimate, decent-sized shock to the system was the cost of living shock. And now, of course, we have this wave of geopolitical uncertainty washing over us. Each of those individually, once in a generation, come once in a century nasties. And they have scarred the psychology of businesses, of households, of governments, of charities, and of universities in ways that have understandably led to them feel very cautious, to hunker down under the duvet and not put their balance sheet to work. What John Maynard Keynes, the famous British economist 100 years ago, called the paradox of thrift. In that very uncertain environment where you've been scarred by past nasties, the temptation is to save rather than spend. But what feels individually sensible and rational and prudent can be collectively calamitous, because that generates weak growth, a lack of dynamism. And that in some ways is the story of all sectors and segments of society right now.
So that's fascinating economic insight, but you also look like you were personally a bit scarred. You call them like nasties. So what's it like personally to go through those crises when you're in such an important role in the Bank of England? You rose to be chief economist. You were probably, I guess, in the room with various prime ministers and chancellors as some of those things were happening. There's a personal scar tissue there too, I guess, which is maybe explaining why you're doing what you're doing now. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. I'd say I'd be careful how you say this. But I view, the word crisis in Mandarin breaks down into challenge and opportunity.
Yeah, it's a shame we don't have that in English.
The same ethos is not really there, because we can be so preoccupied with the challenge bit, we forget about the opportunity bit. Now, I've had the good fortune, and I use those words advisedly, having lived through a whole sequence of crises. My first formative experience at the Bank of England, just after I joined, I had the very good fortune, and this is all good fortune, good luck, to be on the bank's foreign exchange dealing desk in September 1992, when we happened to fall out of the exchange rate mechanism.
Wow. Okay, so that was your first big rodeo.
That was my first big rodeo. And of course, although those leave scars and scar tissue, what they do give you, what they do endow you with, is sometimes a whole career's worth of experience. And the really good fortune that I have had is to have had a sequence of those crises, which leave me a little bit bruised, battered, and bewildered, but more importantly, forewarned for next time. With a bit of an instinct, and it is instinct, about both when they are coming and what to do once they arrive, the management of them. That's the challenge bit. And let's be clear, all the ones I've faced into have been challenging. But the other side of that coin is the opportunity bit. And if you're in the public policy game, which I have been for the larger part of my life, opportunities come no better than after a crisis. That is the moment when the Overton window is widest.
Just for people who don't know what that is.
The potential to affect not just change, but lasting and radical change
So
to the existing system.
Becomes a bigger spread of opportunity.
Completely.
Right.
Into that liminal space, that transition space, where the old has died, but the new has yet to be born. You can then, if you prepared yourself, empty when the world is discombobulated and looking for new bearings, you can then pour in your own ideas, right? And change the landscape of debate and policy in radical ways. And that is the opportunity. They are no more golden than that, I can tell you. So although from that probably dozen crises that I've lived through and been part of, each one has also, I know, offered up the golden opportunity to reset the dial, to have the debate orbit a different planet than it was pre-crisis, provided you've prepared your ideas in advance. We could reset the contours of public policy about regulation after the global financial crisis. We could not have done it before the global financial crisis. And my good fortune was to have spent 10 years thinking about that refashioning before the crisis struck, into which liminal space you then pour your ideas.
That is a tantalising moment that we want to come back to, Andy. But before we go too far into the later stages of your career, I just want to rewind a bit. I just want to take you back to what your first little experience, little taster of leadership was. Can you remember a time in your childhood or early years that felt to you like you were getting a glimpse of leadership?
Well, it probably was no more than a tiny glimpse out, in fairness. But it certainly, it was a moment where my passions were aroused for what I want to do with my life, which in a sense is the wellspring of leadership.
Yeah.
Without that,
Yes.
What's it all about? And for me, that was, so I was born in the Northeast, Sunderland Council Estate, but then grew up in Yorkshire. Think early 80s, think whopper recession, think 3 million people unemployed, think social strife. And me thinking, what's that all about?
And what sort of age are you talking about here? Is it teenager?
14, 15.
Yeah.
Sort of in that sort of what was O levels, these days GCSEs. That's how old I am. Just becoming aware of the world, both around me, because of course people in my community were being made unemployed. Not my parents, fortunately, but a lot of my friends' parents, and in the wider and in the across the nation, and thinking, one, that's a really rubbish outcome, right? For the individuals, for their families, for communities, for the country.
Yeah.
Why has that happened? And what can be done to prevent it happening in future? Those are the two questions I started asking myself, age 13, 14, 15, in the face of that early 80s recession in the UK. And in some ways, 40 years on, 40 plus years on, actually, there's the self-same questions I'm asking myself. There's the self-same questions that have sustained me throughout the period since in my career, trying to make sense of what is happening, of what is going wrong, and trying to put it right. So that was the seed of the passion and the seed for pursuing a career in public policy. And then I think as soon as you're in it, you want to make big change. Otherwise, what is the point? And ultimately, that for me is the act of leadership.
So you had the motivation, the drive, there was a real purpose propelling you forward. What gave you the belief that you could make some meaningful contribution towards it?
Well, I think that is born of crisis experience. So I think once you've lived through a few of those, you begin to spot the chance, spot that opportunity to remake the world in a different mold. And you can surprise yourself. I surprised myself at how much change you can make to people's minds and their actions.
But how are you learning this, Andy? You know, are you finding yourself in debating societies? Are you talking to adults around you and starting to realise they're listening? Or what is it that sets you off on this path that you could make a contribution?
Yeah. Well, a couple of points on that. First, make sure you're a mountain climber. So always make sure you're pursuing the biggest problems, the biggest mountains. And the more they are cloaked in fog and cloud, in other words, you don't know what the answer is, you don't know where the summit resides, the greater the attraction.
Where did you learn that?
I think I'm just, in a sense, Matt, I think I'm just fortunate in that I'm attracted by ambiguity and uncertainty. I know lots of people, entirely reasonably, are repelled by the self-same thing.
That's the normal kind of reaction, but you run towards the mountain.
Because if the challenge is big enough, and if the summit is uncertain enough, there is no more interesting, I would say to an extent, noble pursuit than wanting to ascend to the summit. It's then a journey of discovery. You know, when I think about what goes wrong in those various crises I've mentioned, of course, there's lots of failures, always multiple failures by multiple actors, never one culprit, never one singular problem. But if I take a really biggie, like the global financial crisis, of the many failures, the biggest failure was a failure of imagination, right? Too few people had not even had within their frame of reference the possibility of something like this happening. It's imagination failure by bankers, by rating agencies, by regulators, by central banks. So I think an act of creativity and imagination before the fact, especially of a cross-disciplinary nature, in pursuit of the summit, you know, that has been my recipe for change.
So I've seen you run towards the summit in your professional life, and I don't know, how did you become the person that was able to do that either without fear or without letting the fear become a barrier? So I'm still interested. What were you like as a teenage Andy? So like take 15-year-old Andy. What were you like? Were you confident? Were you doing well at school? Were you already showing signs of being very articulate? What would your friends and your family and your teachers have said about you at that time?
I mean, I was reasonably diligent, but not excessively so. I had a fairly rubbish school, doing average, playing enormous amounts of cricket, which was my passion then, and to some extent still my passion, now. I was sort of loosely engaged in thinking about policy and thinking about politics. I liked the idea, as I still do, of melding together ideas and thoughts from different disciplines to light on solutions to some of those thorny problems. Those are all characteristics of me as a 15-year-old, but a fairly undistinguished 15-year-old, I think it's fair to say.
Do you think your teachers would have been surprised or kind of validated by the fact you'd gone on to be so successful?
I'd be astonished at age 15. So it's. I mean, I've grown in confidence. You know, I do not come from an especially academic
family
background. People say first in their family to go to university. That's certainly true in my case. But I was first in my family to do A levels.
Yeah.
Right. So there wasn't really a pathway. I didn't know anyone who was doing this. But the interest was there. And the interest has grown. I mean, I'm a deeply introverted person.
Really?
And remain a deeply introverted person.
What do you mean by that? Because you come across, so the classic thing, you come across as very articulate and confident in talking and not stopping to think a lot. So, for me, that looks like an extrovert behavior. So how does introversion, what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, the deep difference, I think, for me, introversion, extroversion is do other people add or subtract energy when you meet them? Right?
Oh my God. Are you being drained by
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. The batteries are, no, they're not. When it's people well, like you two, it's, of course, less draining. But, a great many actors are introverts.
Yeah.
And to some extent, this is all a bit of a performance, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about, does the strength come from within or without?
Yeah.
And for me, it's very much from within.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's why, when I'm doing that, sorry to interrupt, there's nothing like thinking things through yourself from first principles. Right? When people say, sometimes when I'm maybe suggesting solutions for policy problems that feel like they're slightly left field, and people say, sort of Yesminster-like, that's a brave suggestion. And the truth is, it's the opposite of brave. It's brave when you haven't thought it through.
Yeah.
And are shooting from the hip.
I don't know
if you thought it through, it's the opposite of brave. It's just as A follows B.
I don't know if you've seen these clips of Eileen Gu, the freestyle skier, who's incredibly successful, talking about the extent to which she lives in her own head and thinks very deeply about a whole range of issues, which means that when she needs to engage, for example, in public stage Q&A, she already has a really good sense of where she is, and it's a way of sort of training her thinking. And I think what you're saying is very aligned with that, and yeah, absolutely very impressive. I want to just keep going a little bit more on your backstory. Were there people that inspired you along the way that you looked to as heroes, or people that gave you confidence, even more confidence, that you could follow the path that you were on and be successful?
I mean, lots of those. In terms of, people who have had a shaping role, the single most important job I've ever done isn't the 32 years I spent at the Bank of England. It was the job in the fruit shop in the next door village when I was, 13, 14, which were a pair of Jewish sisters running this fruit shop. And they got up every morning to go to the market to get the fresh produce. Always first there, 4 o'clock every morning, first there. Would work through the day, end to end, 6 days a week, and do the books on Sunday. So in terms of helping me understand, one, what hard work was, and two, what it meant to run even a small business successfully, all the skills from buying at 5 o'clock in the morning, right through to doing the books on a Sunday afternoon, that was a formative experience. Everything else has been detail after that, in terms of what I've learned about business.
Interesting. I've got one more question for. I'm going to let Matt have a go. When I think of you as a leader, one of the things I think is very distinctive about you is you're a very good communicator. You can make even quite abstruse concepts, at least for non-experts like me, feel accessible, and you do that in terms of public-facing activities, but also with policymakers, with politicians in particular. When did you realise that communication was one of your core assets, and what have you done to kind of cultivate that along the way? I mean, you've got a very jaunty turn of phrase. Is this something that you really nurture and work on and think about as well in advance, or is that really quite instinctive?
That jaunty turn of
phrase.
Get me into trouble now and again. Well, I think probably relatively early on, I began to see the virtue of the catchy metaphor in reaching audiences that are otherwise difficult to reach if you were a jobbing central banker, as I was at the time. When I wrote a paper about the over-complexity of financial regulation, something of interest to a tiny number of people, the fact that I called it the dog and the frisbee opened it up to an audience that otherwise would have felt that's not for them.
You might just need to unpack that a little bit for us. What is the significance of the dog and the frisbee?
Well, it is that dogs are better, or as good or better, at catching frisbees than humans, despite the fact they aren't great at physics. And the reason is the dog uses a rule of thumb, a heuristic, to help them catch the frisbee. The self-same heuristic we ourselves use, actually. And it's the very simplicity of that heuristic that enables the dog to catch the frisbee, despite the problem itself being a very complex one.
Amazing.
The essence of that being, the right solutions, the robust solutions to complex problems are ordinarily simple ones rather than complex ones. Because complex solutions to complex problems lead to complexity squared, which makes a bad situation even worse. But that's an abstruse argument, whereas you mentioned dogs and everyone's, sitting up and paying attention, basically.
Yeah.
So that helps. But I want to make a different point, though, related but different, because we can sometimes delude ourselves into thinking that communication is a one-way door. Talking, actually, is really easy, because that's taking what's inside your head and having it come out your mouth, hopefully as clearly and compellingly, as concisely as possible. That's pretty easy. Listening, now that's really difficult. That's the other side of the door, right? Because that's taking what's inside everyone else's heads and trying to make sense of that. So that the greater part, I spent about 15 years. Probably the only thing I learned in my final 15 years at the Bank of England was becoming slightly less bad at listening. And I did that, through brute force. I forced myself, being an introvert, to get on my bike and to get round the country to meet as eclectic a range of people as possible. Bear in mind, this is a massive energy drain for me, meeting new people.
But you were on your bike some of the time, so you could...
Yeah, exactly. And to learn the art of listening, active listening, with audiences you do not know, speaking in a language that is not your own. I don't mean English or not, I mean...
Non-economics.
Non-economics. On issues with which you might not be familiar. And having spent many, many hours and days and weeks, months doing that, I began to become slightly better at that active listening, harvesting stories from people about what really mattered to their lives that were otherwise lost, because these were largely people without voice unless you gave them voice. And even if you did, unless you listened very actively and didn't fill the space with your own verbiage, you would miss the point. And the single most important reason why now and again I've been able to spot an issue 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ahead of time is because it was there, hiding in plain sight, in the conversations, in the pubs, on the high streets, in the community centres. Unless you put yourself in that space and refine your way of thinking to enable you to listen to what's really being said, the stories that are being offered up, you will miss that. And that's why, as a country, we missed Brexit, among many other things, right? It was there in the pubs, there in the high streets. We weren't listening hard enough. We didn't listen well.
We, the sort of central bankers, the metropolitan elite, the media? What do you mean there?
I think it's right across the. I know very, very few leaders in any walk of life, Matt, who do this well,
Yeah.
because you only do it well by practicing.
Yeah.
I mean, why did? Let's take an example. Let's take Barack Obama. Most would say, justifiably, a towering speaker, a brilliant orator, right? Where did Barack Obama learn his trade? Community foundations in the United States. Active listening at the local level. That's how he had the instinct, the nose, the sixth sense for what was being said. And out of that can come a real sense of what needs fixing. What's the single most, of the long list of things that need fixing, what's the single most important thing for people's lives to make it better? And that's the beauty, and that is the power of listening well, or in my case, slightly less poorly than would have been the case 20 years
It's
ago.
fascinating.
So I'm in danger of embracing you, which would be awkward because we're two,
We know each other
English
well.
men.
Come on.
But
Might have to ring my bell
so
if you do that.
my first rule of leadership is listen, and I think it's partly because I'm an extrovert, not an introvert, so I have to talk to understand what I think, and if I don't have that as my first rule, to stop and listen, I think I get in my own way. So I'm totally agree with you. I love the imagery. You're sort of listening and hearing that there's this mountain that needs to be addressed, and then you're starting to conceive of how you might address that ahead of time. And that's an incredibly unusual talent, I think. Can we take you into those crisis moments at the Bank of England? And as you were talking about leaders and listening, it occurred to me that you work with Mark Carney, who's a leader we saw at the Bank of England, very much like central casting governor of the Bank of England, very sort of straight, clear communicator. But now he's leading Canada with apparently humor and energy and joy and strength that we didn't necessarily see there. So tell us a bit about what you saw in Mark Carney and that sort of transition from somebody who was working closely with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had the good fortune, it was good fortune, to work pretty closely with 4 or 5 governors. The first I worked most closely with, actually, was when I was but a boy, was Eddie George. He was the governor several governors ago, and Eddie brought a distinct leadership style. He could be quite a presence, but bilaterally was fantastic. Avuncular.
So one-to-one, very friendly, but
Amazing.
in the public arena, how did you come across?
Well,
him?
he had a fairly avuncular external presence. He was a pretty demanding internal leader, to put it charitably. But you got him, I was fortunate, bilaterally, and he was the wise grandfather, right? I was sitting down. He wasn't long into the role. He wasn't long into being governor, although at the time he'd been there for 30 odd years. And just me and he, I think we're going to see Gordon Brown as Chancellor at the time. He said, "You know what, Andy?" He said, "I shouldn't have been surprised about this governor job. So I worked at the Bank of England for 30 odd years, but I've been really surprised." He said, "What I've been most surprised about is I'm never Eddie anymore. I'm always the governor, 24/7. He said, "I should have known that, really, but it's really struck me that I'm never myself. I can't be myself now." Very interesting. What was most interesting, actually, was the next bit. And then he said, "So the lesson I take from that is, unless you really, really, 2 reallys, want to be the governor of the Bank of England, you really, really shouldn't be." And I reckon that's the single best piece of career advice I've ever had. It's nice to think, let's keep on climbing the greasy pole to the very top. But careful what you wish for. Few are those for whom that really suits. It may feel like the right thing to do, but for many it's not the right thing to do. So he brought that. Mervyn King, the governor after that, I worked very closely with Mervyn. academic background, deep intellect, first principle solutions, and I mentioned that in a way as my orientation as well, brought real rigor to the role, and of course lived through much of that crisis time. I mean, truth be told, we were all playing, when that crisis broke, almost no one had a crisis in their lived experience. And we all were playing catch up at the time.
It's true across not just central economists, but
Across the piece.
Political leaders,
Everywhere.
business leaders, everyone.
Exactly. And then Mark, who in some ways was a bit of a blend of the two, but with a much more political, small p political overlay.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if take what is a deeply political issue like Scottish independence or Brexit, both of which fell under Mark's watch. I can think of some governors who remain nameless who in that situation would have said that's too political for us as a central bank. We are apolitical, we are neutral, we are independent. If we want to preserve our independence, we say no comment when asked about Brexit, when asked about Scottish independence. Mark's inclination was the opposite of that. That as a part of being a public servant, it was the bank's job to opine on the economic consequences of both Scottish independence and Brexit. He wasn't thanked for his troubles in either case, but had the political savvy to want to make that case, because the alternative was probably an unviable position for us. And we've seen that blend of economics and social policy and politics, shining through as Mark has ascended to his prime ministerial
So you
role.
could see the Mark Carney Canada leader in the Mark Carney governor of the Bank of England. Absolutely.
Yes. I mean, just think the morning after the Brexit vote, who was doing the televised address to calm the nation? It wasn't David Cameron. It wasn't George Osborne. It was Mark Carney. So in some ways, I'm not sure if that was Mark auditioning for the big job, but anyway, he's now got the big job in Canada. And Godspeed to him, because that's quite a challenge.
Yeah. And then, am I right in thinking you also work with Rachel Reeves?
Well, Rachel, who's a lot younger than me, we overlapped at the bank. Didn't know each other well at the bank, but got to know each other fairly well after she had left. So we overlapped, Rachel and I.
Yeah. And so you must have, over the 32 years, seen lots of people kind of go through that organisation and go on to do all sorts of different things. Not all chancellors and prime ministers.
No.
I get, but then also at some point you come to the realisation, having been through multiple crises, you said the last 15 years you were learning a bit less. So tell us a bit more about that and how you thought about your own progression.
Just repeat that last point, Matt. So I missed the...
Yeah, you said in the last sort of 15 years in the bank, you were learning a bit less. You went on your cycling tour and you were listening, which is great. But you'd seen a load of crises. So how did you think about your own personal development? One of the things our audience is really interested in is how you think about careers and what you do over time.
Well, I mean, there is a risk. I mean, because central banking is quite four-cornered, and actually you aren't encouraged to stray beyond the four corners.
You mean you're in a box?
You're in a box.
Yeah, okay.
The bank does a small number of big things, like setting interest rates, which is what it did in the last 10 years of my career, making sure the financial system doesn't fall over, which I've done in the previous 10 years. But, those being a small number of big things, you weren't actively discouraged, but it would have been unusual to opine on things such as inequality, or even the climate crisis until Mark turned up, or issues around industrial strategy. But those were all issues that I felt were crucial for we as the central bank not to necessarily dictate policy on, but to have line of sight on. Of course, there were crucial environmental factors for us doing our day job. So spent an increasing amount of my time straying beyond the four corners. And in fairness, my bosses at the time, the various governors that I mentioned, were good enough to give me license to do that.
To throw the frisbee from time to time.
To throw the frisbee, and I was used by at least two or probably all of them in a slightly outriding capacity. So if I was the person, not whose job it was, but it took it upon themselves to look round corners, to think about what not the issues are of today, but what they will be in 6, 12, 18 months' time, and indeed to perhaps even suggest some solutions to them. I always had the lag between me saying things in a speech and it being adopted or not by a governor as between 6 and 18 months. And that was the outriding role I was very happy to play. It wasn't, it was always backed up by having spent, in my case, at least 6 months, sometimes longer. I'm a slow learner, thinking about it deeply with a group of people, every which way, and convincing myself I had thought it through to the stage where I lighted on a solution that was the right solution given the problem set. So this wasn't spinning the wheel and hoping for the best. This was born of having set aside a serious amount of time with some serious people to try and problem solve. So towards the second half of my time at the bank, I definitely strayed from the path of righteousness on a whole manner of issues about which I make no apologies whatsoever. Doing more of what I mentioned at the very beginning, actually, which is trying to fuse together disciplines. So I've drawn I'm an economist by background. I've drawn very extensively on all the social sciences and indeed most of the natural sciences as well, in trying to make sense of the world. And it's also meant working on a cross-sectoral basis, so dabbling into the world of charity or academia or business for solutions and for insights about what might be done. One of the things that I'm most pleased I did ever was in the teeth of that financial crisis in 2008, 2009, when, let's be honest, economists like me were in the doghouse. Back to dogs, aren't we? And rightly so. It wasn't just our fault, but certainly to a significant extent our fault. And that was the moment when I set up Pro Bono Economics, which is a charity charged with using economist expertise to assess the social impact of charitable activity. And that, in some ways, was an act of redemption for having ruined the world. I mean, not personally, but, collectively as a profession. It was our way of seeking remorse or showing that we could do some good if we applied our minds to different sets of problems. In some ways, my decision to leave the bank ultimately wasn't because I wasn't loving it. I'll always love the bank deeply and passionately. You can't not if you've been somewhere for 32 years.
It's one time.
But because I was still mountain climbing. And central banks do not contain the right tools of the trade to tackle the mountains, the biggest mountains we now face, social, economic, and environmental.
Thank you, Andy. You're a busy man. You've already listed a number of things you're currently involved with. And for as long as I can remember, you've had a sort of plural career. You've had lots of different compartments. You've had, alongside that, of course, family life. And you do a lot of public speaking, a lot of media work. How have you learnt to live sustainably when you obviously have this passion and drive that makes you embrace these opportunities, throw yourself up the mountain? How do you make that okay from the point of view of holding body and soul together?
Maybe you haven't, Hayaatun. I don't know.
Tell us. It's really important when people see public figures who just seem to be astonishingly good at doing the things they do, to also understand there's complexity to that and things that we need to do as leaders to help make that possible.
Yeah. Well, I think in my case, what certainly helped hugely is the very diversity you mentioned. So the fact that you are seeking insights, thoughts, reflections, ideas from as eclectic a range of arenas and people as possible is what keeps it interesting. And what keeps me going, to be honest.
So that's rewarding in itself, but at the same time, there's an hours in the day problem. And, I've seen you be doing a meeting with ministers in the morning and doing a day job in between and then going off to do after dinner speeches. Actually, just at a stamina level, how have you found that? How have you found that manageable, made it more manageable?
Well, I mean, there's times when that is demanding. But I'm not the only person on the planet to have a demanding job. I mean, in some ways, the more demanding jobs, are those where, people are getting out of bed fearful about whether they'll earn enough
Sure.
to feed their families or to sustain their lives. And I've been very fortunate in having jobs that haven't meant that that's been a particular concern. I've also been very fortunate in having jobs that have given me a degree of intellectual freedom.
Yeah.
To look under different stones and to pursue areas of interest, and that is energy providing.
Yeah.
Can you exhaust yourself? Yes. Have I exhausted myself on occasions? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so taking some time to replenish, whether that's with friends or family, is really important. I tell myself, this is the year when I return to playing sport and playing musical instruments, and maybe that one year that New Year's resolution will come true. I think it's been a real privilege to be able to roam around, and that is, take the opposite. During COVID, COVID crushed all of us.
Yeah.
But in so many ways and at so many levels. But I hadn't fully clocked how much of a crusher on creativity and energy it had been for me. And not having the stimulus of other people to talk to or different experiences. We know quite a lot about the creative process now and what stimulates it. And different people and different environments and different sounds and different smells are crucial to nurturing the creative process. Starved of that sensory experience, you are starved not just of creativity, but of energy.
Yeah.
And that for me is the lesson. I was lucky to have that full sensory experience throughout much of my career, and that gave me energy and I hope a degree of creativity.
Yeah.
And that can sustain you.
An interesting counterpoint to what drains you as an introvert. But I just also want to get to another topic, which is something you're associated with a lot, which is levelling up, as we used to call it, opening up opportunity across the UK, we might use now as an alternative phrase. So we work together a bit on that as well. And I know that it's something you are personally very deeply passionate about. And within that, the topic of skills is a key area of focus. So if you had free rein, what policy prescription would you write to make sure that we continue to have high quality jobs across the UK in this very complex time, and also the skills that we need to deliver against that? What would be the things that you would focus in on if you had free rein?
Yeah, heaven forbid, Adam. And it was great to work together with you on that, and I certainly learned a huge amount from you as part of that.
We're going to edit that bit out, Andy. So keep going.
No, it said, you know,
your applause.
I've learned greatly from both of you, and you both know that. If I was offered just a single thing to get right, it absolutely would be around the people bit. Sounds obvious in a way, isn't it? But often overlooked. We're so busy, thinking about projects. I'm not against projects. I'm all for projects, right? But ultimately, even projects stand or fall on people and their skills.
So what do you mean by this, Andy? What in practice is that distinction referring to?
Well, take an area that you both know infinitely more than me about, which is innovation technology, right? why does technology succeed or fail? Ultimately, it's its application through people and by people. And that's true of everything I've ever come across. And yet we sit here with having underinvested in our people and their skills over, I would say, at least a generation, if not half a century. What are the diagnostics on that? Well, they include the fact that we have approaching 10 million people who are economically inactive, the larger number of whom aren't even seeking work or further training. Add to that another 10 to 15 million who do not have the skills they need to be as productive at work as they could and should be. Massive skills gap that is getting worse over time because our schools and skills system is not fit, not even close to being fit for 21st century purpose.
So that's our mountain. So how do we actually haul ourselves up that mountain?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the reimagining of both of those systems, schools and skills. It has to include schools because many young people are lost to the world of work before they even reach the world of work.
Yeah.
In other words, in school. That's why we've got approaching 1 million 16, 24-year-olds who are economically inactive, othered by, out of the system. I mean, think of the losses that imposes on those individuals, on their families, on their communities, and our economy of having that number of people locked out of the system, most likely, in some cases, on a lifelong basis. That is a failing in our school system, a failing in our skill system, and the solution to it, I hadn't forgot that solution, is a complete reimagining of the school curriculum so that people have built in from the earliest of years a work readiness and an understanding of work. Business itself needs to be part of that solution by building careers advice and work experience in from the earliest of years. Everyone should be guaranteed a pathway through to apprenticeship, degree apprenticeship, or a degree. That should come as a matter of right, that you have that pathway and you get to choose which pathway you will be on. That will require a new social contract between government, education providers, and business. It will require a reimagining of what we mean by the curriculum, not just what we teach, but how we choose to teach it. It will require a rethinking by business of pathways into employment. So much good would come from that reimagining in a way that would, growth is built. Obsession with growth right now, but it's built from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Growth starts with the individual and putting them on the opportunity escalator that currently too many are being lost from. So if I had one thing, it's a big thing. It's a system re-engineering problem. It's orbiting that different planet I mentioned earlier on. The system's been broken for at least a generation. Given the wave of AI, this system will become even more dysfunctional unless there is that reimagining and reframing of the system.
So we can hear your intensity and the energy you have for this topic. And so it's fantastic that you are right at that intersection between the actors that will need to be part of that system transformation with your role at BCCI, your role in Sheffield, and your interfaces in policy. So we're looking forward to seeing how that long-sounding mountain can be conquered. It's really important for all of us, I think, that we do make more progress. I only have my little quick-fire questions left. Matt, what did you want to cover before we get to those?
To that, just briefly, Andy. So people out there listening to you, seeing you frame that problem, leaders today and aspiring leaders tomorrow, if there's one thing you'd ask them to do as a result of that diagnosis and your deep thinking on this, what would it be very crisply for today's leaders and tomorrow's leaders to make a difference on that?
Well, I mean, my one point on that would be leadership is a team sport. We can, and more to the point, need all to be leaders. We place too heavy a burden on the shoulders of our political leaders. And arguably, it's a burden that is too heavy for them to carry right now for a variety of reasons. That burden needs sharing. All those moments of great transition and transformation in our societies and economies over time, the burden of leadership has been shared equally across public, private, and civil society sectors, and not to forget academia. So I would say that now is the time for business to step up and act as well as talk about what is needed. Now is the time for civil society to speak with a common collective voice and act on the back of it. And now is the time for academia or learning institutions in many various forms to do the self-same, to share the burden and to create that fusion across sectors, which, as I say, I think is a wellspring of transformation.
Thank you.
Amazing, Andy. We've covered so many really critical topics. You've been very generous in your sharing of career stories and insights that I'm sure will have been really interesting to our audience. Just to round things off with a little
What's coming
light
out?
relief.
Yeah, watch out.
We've got a speed round coming up. So I am going to turn into ruthless, time management master here and ring a bell if your answers go on too long.
I can see the bell.
The bell physically
Before me.
exists, yes.
Wow.
So just to signal how serious we are about this. So a kind of a sentence answer would be ideal, or a couple of words if it's that simple. So we'll start with the fact that you go on this tour of the country. You've been on this tour of the country previously. You're embarking on another one through the Chambers of Commerce. For people who are sort of stuck in their metropolitan elite bubble or golden triangle-centric bubble, where should they go and visit to get more of a sense of what's happening around other parts of the UK?
Well, I'm a grizzled northerner, so I would say head north and walk around.
Be specific. The north is a big place. Give us one or two.
Well, go to
specifics.
my hometown of Sunderland.
Sunderland, great.
And which has been a city that has been at best flatlining for the whole of my working life, but where there's just in the air a sense that the corner has been turned.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. I told you, ruthless. When you've had a really tough day and the world is grinding you down, you've spent too much time with all these people you don't know, having to get to know them and spend energy, what piece of music would cheer you up, lift your spirits?
Yeah. So almost any music will, because I'm quite eclectic on that front. And indeed, this is not one sentence, is it?
No.
I'm not playing by the rules.
One track.
The one track would be Rainy Night in Soho by the Pogues.
Excellent. Wasn't expecting that.
Anything by the Pogues.
Hey.
Do it for you.
I'll start ringing my bell in a minute. Behave yourself, Matt. I'll do a quick round with you later if you want.
You scumbag, you maggot.
What's the most important economic theory or concept that everybody should understand but probably doesn't? I'm giving you one.
The theory of the second best, which says that in a world that is already with failure and distortion, sometimes adding another distortion can make the world better rather than worse.
Wow, that's deep. I have to come back to that. What's your most embarrassing moment as a leader? What experience makes your toes curl just thinking about it?
As a leader?
Well, I mean, okay, we'll be generous. Share, as long as it's not oversharing.
An experience that's been particularly...
embarrassing, humiliating, yes.
Well, I mean, humbling. I get humbled all the time, and I'm very grateful for my humbling. I think giving a speech to the Occupy movement during the global financial crisis was not embarrassing, but was certainly a humbling experience to have that firsthand.
Did you get fruit thrown at you?
Not physically, but metaphorically, absolutely. And I would say, with hindsight, rightly so.
What do you hope people say about you when you're not in the room?
What do I hate?
What do you hope?
Hope.
I'm more positive than that.
I would hope they'd say that I was approachable
Approachable. Great.
and easy to chat to.
Easy to
I
chat
hope
to.
that's what they'd
Well,
say.
we've certainly found that. What book or resource do you recommend to others who want to develop themselves as leaders?
Develop themselves as leaders. Well, without naming a specific book, I think there's a huge amount to be had by reading fiction rather than just fact. If we are
Name one fiction book that you think is sort of worth a read for anybody.
History of the World in 10.5 Chapters by Julian Barnes is my favourite author.
Excellent.
That's almost a fusion of fact and fiction, and much of life is a fusion of fact and fiction. You know,
I'm going to ring my bell in a minute, Andy. It's a great answer.
it's an active imagination, right? Failure of
Active
imagination. How do you stimulate your imagination? Social science fiction is what I do for a living.
Lovely. Of all the things you've done, and you've done a lot as we've discussed, what has given you the deepest satisfaction or pride?
I would say setting up the charity Pro Bono Economics.
Brilliant. And this podcast is called What We Don't Know. So what do you know now that you wished you'd known earlier?
That it's possible, however modest your background, to change the world on its axis if you pick your moment and if you carry out your patient preparation for that moment.
What a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Andy Haldane. You've been fantastic. Thank you for sharing what you know.
Great to speak to you both, as ever.
Thanks, Andy. So we had so much that we know now. Dogs and frisbees, fruit and veg, hearing to perceive a mountain, cycling around the country to cure your introversion, and the history of every Bank of England governor in the last 30 years. What a wealth of new insights.
Yeah, it was a metaphor and content-rich discussion for sure, which is what you expect with Andy. He's so knowledgeable and so passionate about what he does. That really came across, didn't it? You know, this is personal for him.
Yeah, but I think he's one of the reasons he's been so effective in his career is that ability to deeply think about complicated topics, but then get them across in a way that means something and matters to people. And I was really struck by, he was doing that dynamically as we were talking as well. Like the most important job he had was working in a fruit and veg store. And you can see how that equipped him as an economist to look for things that were simple enough to make work.
Yeah, that's right. So these are metaphors with meaning, which is really important. Sometimes you kind of get led by the words. I was also really struck by some of the comments he made about things that are sort of societal level issues that he has personally tried to engage with or been impacted by. So, for example, this idea that there's psychological scarring from these series of crises within business, within universities, within individuals, within policymakers. When he says it like that, it sounds so obvious, but I don't necessarily think it's something that we think about as much. And of course, his comments on listening and listening being an area that so many leaders fall down on. I thought, probably with both of us that resonated.
Yeah, I mean, I really vividly remember he talked about Brexit and how it was a sort of surprise for the sort of leadership class and for many, many people. And as a result of that surprise, we organised some focus groups with Brexit voters and could go and listen to them. And I realised that they've been telling us this all the time. We just hadn't been hearing it. And that was what he was saying, actively listening and really understanding what was going on. Super important. And I think also you mentioned the point about scar tissue and living through those sort of crises. In this world we're in now, what worries me, it's so complex and it's so uncertain. The risk is you sit on your hands. And actually, I think the way you find at how to go forward is by trying different things and experimenting and learning what's working and what's not working. And that's a real risk for the moment. And then the other thing I think that I could see both of us really reacting to was his assessment of the skills issue facing the country and the scale of that and the amount of systemic change that's needed to move us forward again.
Yeah, and some people talk about system level change and you kind of go, it's a bit of a cop out. But you can see that he is thinking really, really seriously and practically and engaging in how to get that kind of intersection between public policy, between the education system, between business, between civil society. That's, as he explained to us, where he hangs out. I thought it was quite a wise comment as well, that we risk actually having unrealistic expectations about what political leaders can do, that I think he used the phrase, we're putting too much of a burden on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And we often talk about, the failure of political leadership. I think he sort of flipped that a bit and said, hang on a minute, are your expectations realistic? So I thought it was quite an interesting provocation that I'm going to go and reflect on, definitely.
Yeah, my final thought would be, it was a real rallying call for all of us who are leaders or aspiring to be leaders to rise to the moment. And I think what he was asking us was get connected between public sector, private sector, civil society, different types of people from different types of background. The way we kind of innovate and find a route out of this moment is through that kind of creativity, the human creativity and the skills that we need to do that. So I think inspiring, and using the kind of metaphors he does, he makes it seem so clear what we need to do. And that's one of the things which I think we know now, is that there's some clarity that can help us move forward.
Absolutely. And my final nugget from our conversation with Andy Haldane is that the best careers advice he ever had is that my final nugget from our conversation with Andy Haldane is that the best careers advice that he ever received was think really hard about whether you want to progress into the top job, and don't do it unless you're absolutely convinced that you want it.
You really, really want it.
The two reallys, absolutely.
He's the Spice Girl of this podcast, isn't it? Fantastic. So thank you for joining us, and join us again. And of course, we love hearing from you and your questions. So do send us a note on our socials or at whatwedon'tknow@boxlight.io.
See you soon. Thanks for joining.